everybody. Welcome back to the Pop Culture Show. We got a whole new episode for you. I'm Lilith Dorsey. Whichever way I'm pointing, that's my co-host, Jason Winslade. And we are here to bring you the best and the worst of popular culture and the occult, the crossroads where those two things meet. And we're doing a classic property, something we both grew up on. I feel like I watched more of this probably than any other show when I was little, and that tells you a hell of a lot about me and where I'm at most of the time. But today we'll be talking about the Twilight Zone.
I used to have a much better Rod Serling impression when I was. In fact, I was kind of known as the Twilight Zone kid. Twilight Zone was huge for me as a kid. And I one of the things that's funny about this is that this episode's going to air on Thanksgiving, and one of the things I associate with Thanksgiving is Twilight Zone because growing up in Northeast Ohio, we just had a couple of those UHF stations. You'd watch the parade in the morning. But then they'd have monster movies on the UHF stations like King Kong, Godzilla type stuff, or Three Stooges, or Voyage of Sinbad, or those.
Abbott and Costello, that's what we had in New York.
Those things like that. But they also often had a Twilight Zone marathon. And so that's where I would watch a ton of Twilight Zone. It was on Thanksgiving. So
that's great.
It's a classic.
Now we had that in New York. We had more than one though. We had one on Thanksgiving. We had one on New Year's Day was also the Twilight Zone. So it was you didn't know what time, space, or dimension you were in after that kind of holiday mood. It's great.
Yeah, and there's I have my Twilight Zone lunchbox.
Aww.
The man himself.
I want that.
Yeah.
Do you keep illicit things in there?
No, it's currently empty, but I think I got it at a con or something years ago. But yeah, I mean, Twilight Zone was the thing that shaped my idea of I guess for lack of a better term, occult fiction. So Twilight Zone. I mean, there's been a lot of talk recently. I don't know if you were had read about this and aware of this. Is that there were a lot of stories about Rod Serling, who was such an interesting character. He was definitely a lefty in Hollywood, but very socially conservative, and he was in the military and all of that. But TV was just obviously it was so different then, and you had those instead of movie of the week, they had those Cadillac Theater Presents type of things, and so there would be these one shot made for TV films that sometimes were just filmed on a stage, and Rod Serling wrote a bunch of those, and that's how we started to get into doing what the Twilight Zone became. But there was a story going around about how it was specifically the story of Emmett Till that inspired him to do the Twilight Zone.
I did see that. And it makes sense because that's what I'd always heard too, that he was, again, of the left and into civil rights as much as, a white man in mainstream society could be at that point. But I definitely always saw that, I think. And you see that in the shows as well.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, in fact, I think it was something where he had written a script where it was about that had a lynching in it, but they wouldn't let him do that. What usually happens in, science fiction, weird fiction, whatever, is that they had to sort of relocate it so that it wasn't in the American South. It wasn't a black person that got lynched, but it turned into more of a fantasy setting, like in this other land type of thing. And it was that experience that inspired Serling to create the Twilight Zone as a vehicle for some of these progressive ideas. Now, of course, we look back on it and, it's the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s. So it's not going to be all that progressive, but for the time, really, it made a huge impact on the culture. So,
I mean, think about it. That's 50, 60 plus years now, so I think it's hard to get into to the mindset of that, but I think those of us who are at least of a certain age, like we are, we remember those mores and standards. And I even remember the subway looking like that we see in one of these episodes. So it's like, it was a different time. But I think it also in that way serves as a slice of history because, you know, so much of it was about, it's almost like a reality show, right? And then everything goes wrong. But the way it's shot really is just scenes from a daily life where everything goes amiss.
Yeah, I mean and the structure of it is very it's formulaic to a degree, and you know if you've never seen a Twilight Zone episode, and if that's the case, you know, where have you been, you know, living for the last 60 years? That you know it often it was based on, you know, the anthology series structure, you know, based on you know, act breaks and a twist ending at the, you know, at the end. And uh we decided to take a look at a few episodes from season 2 just kind of randomly. And what's funny is that usually Twilight Zone episodes have kind of dark endings, or they often have, you know, something where you know, the classic of course is Burgess Meredith, where he has all the time in the world to read, you know, yeah, in the library, or you know, in the vault, but he breaks his glasses and it's tragic and all that. So you have these twist endings where it's like, oh man, these bad things happen. But for some reason, just randomly, these 3 that we picked all have more or less happy endings, which was unusual. Um, but yeah, we decided to look at 3 episodes. So a couple of them are kind of famous, another one not so much. But we looked at the Nick of Time, which is William Shatner's first Twilight Zone episode, his less famous one. He's of course known for Nightmare at 20,000 Feet with the airplane gremlin. In my opinion, this is the superior William Shatner episode, because I think it's more subtle. That's Nick of Time, and that aired, I want to say, November 18th, 1960. So right around now, you know, about whatever it is, 60 years ago. And then the second one was Penny for Your Thoughts, which aired in February 1961, same season, later in the next year. And that's with Dick York, of course, famous from Bewitched. And
One of the Darrens.
One of the Darrens. And the third one is The Mind and the Matter, which starred Shelley Berman, who I didn't know. I don't watch the show, but apparently he played Larry David's father in Curb Your Enthusiasm. So he was still around.
Yes.
Until relatively recently. Didn't know that. So Nick of Time was written by Richard Matheson, who's one of the main Twilight Zone writers, famous for I Am Legend, the novel that was adapted several times into different movies, including Omega Man, and then of course I Am Legend with Will Smith later on.
Will Smith. Yeah.
And he also, Richard Matheson also was famous for a few other things too. You know, he wrote for Kolchak. He also, you know, Star Trek. Oh yeah, Richard Matheson also wrote What Dreams May Come, with that the based on, and Legend of Hell House, Somewhere in Time. I mean, just so many.
Somewhere in Time. Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorite movies ever.
So many amazing things that he wrote. Incredible Shrinking Man, some real classics, and then Penny for Your Thoughts was written by another Twilight Zone stalwart, George Clayton Johnson, and George Clayton Johnson was. And just he wrote a lot of Twilight Zone episodes and also Star Trek and Alfred Hitchcock Presents and things like that. He also wrote Ocean's 11.
Oh wow! I love Ocean's. I want to rob a casino.
Yeah, so there's, it's funny because there is a thing about you know, robbing the bank in Penny for Your Thoughts. And Logan's Run. he wrote
Oh
George.
my gosh.
He
My
co-wrote.
palm is way past glowing. I mean,
Yeah,
like, I grew
exactly.
up with
Yeah,
Logan's
you wrote
Run.
Lilith Run. And then the third, The Mind and the Matter was written by Rod Serling. Now, Rod Serling, of course, wrote a lot of these, and The Mind and the Matter isn't one of his more well-known ones. In fact, it's kind of considered sort of a minor episode. There's so many amazing classics, but these three, for me, kind of all fit together because they were all about elements of the mind, and there's even some occult aspects in there where the word occult is even used in Mind and the Matter, and then the two, Penny for Your Thoughts and Nick of Time, also their main plot was based on a coin, so there's that connection. So real quick rundown. Nick of Time, well-known episode, very simple. A married couple is on their way uh, to their future in his new job, coming from New York. He's going to St. Louis, but of course they're on the way. They stop in Ohio, and in the Twilight Zone, weird stuff always happens in Ohio.
This is
That's
why you like it. I'm actually on my way to Ohio tomorrow.
right. Ridgeway, Ohio. Of course, the famous Twilight Zone episode, Willoughby, Ohio. It was part of that thing in the 1950s where, you know, uh, because writers were from L.A. or New York, that the strange things always happen in the middle of the country, and that there's this sort of fear of the rural or fear of the small town to a certain degree, but also nostalgia for the small town. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that happens that's strange. That's in places like Ohio. So they're on their way. They stop at a diner. There's this fortune telling machine with a little devil head on top, where you can ask yes or no questions. And I was wondering if Nick of Time was meant to be a pun on old Nick,
Yeah, yeah, I think it is.
right? And so yeah,
Yeah.
they ask questions, thinking it's a lark. But you see very early on that William Shatner's character is superstitious. Um, the first thing he does is he as they're walking down the street, he pulls his wife on one side so they don't get separated by the lamp post, and he says
Don't
bread
cut
and
the
butter.
post. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Bad
bread and
luck.
butter, which I had to explain to my partner not too long ago because I was like, this is a thing I remember in cartoons and the Twilight Zone when I was a kid. Bread and butter, like nobody knows what that is, and apparently,
Oh, really?
it's an old, it's an old,
No, we always did it in my family. I thought
yeah,
everybody
yeah,
knew it.
and apparently the because it protects you from being separated, right? But
Mm-hmm.
it only works if
Yeah,
both people say it,
yeah.
um, which
Or you
I
could
didn't,
not split the pole.
right?
You only
You
have to
don't.
say it if you do it.
Yeah. So he's very clearly superstitious. You see later on that he's got a rabbit foot and a 4-leaf clover thing, and they slowly but surely get sucked into this thing where these answers are, you know, vague enough that they fit the situation perfectly, while still um, leaving room for doubt.
I think that's the whole thing. He keeps saying to his wife, it's so specific, right? And that's the thing. We hear these people that go to these, quasi, I can talk to the dead kind of thing. And it's always, it was so specific. But so much of it, when you back away, it really is a generic proclamation, or it's based on, okay, most people are going to have, a dead relative that misses them, things like that. What I thought was interesting about the episode too was that, yes, he's superstitious, but like so many people that I know, he very quickly goes from superstition into obsession. Once he gets his first or second right kind of thing, he gets obsessed with it and has to ask over and over and over again. Phenomena as a psychic that I'm sure everybody can relate to who's been in that position. There's this thirst for knowing the unknown, right?
Yeah, it's that intermittent validation that
Mm-hmm.
is as soon as he gets some of that validation, he wants more and more.
Mm-hmm.
And I also find it interesting that unlike the stereotypes of the time, it's the wife who's the rational one, who says, "Hey, this is silly. Why are you doing this? Can't we just
No.
get out of here?"
No, I love that. I love that because she ends up having this kind of reason that stands almost in opposition to the things that the little bobblehead devil thing is telling them.
Yeah, and there's, I mean, the twist ending there is that they are able to pull themselves away from it, and it's clear that it's because of his relationship to his wife that he's able to let it go. But then you see the couple at the end come in who clearly, and it's that specific fortune telling machine at that specific table. It's clear that there's other same kind of machine all over that diner, but it's just that one at that one table that they have chosen to be obsessed over, and that it's clear that that couple is trapped and they're not going anywhere. So that's kind of like it's a happy ending for the main characters, but still somewhat dark.
I'm
But
not sure what the message is. You know, at the end when Shatner and his wife are walking out, they're like, "You can decide your own life," and they're like taking joy and revelry in this, whereas these other people are like slave with their pile of pennies, getting ready to ask questions, and they get told point blank that they can't leave the town. But then
yeah,
that's also what they asked. So that
totally.
always goes into, our tarot episode about what are you asking, right? Like, so
Yeah.
what are you asking, and what are those answers you're getting?
And I think Matheson, and it's funny because Matheson, he tells a story about how he got the idea. He was traveling with his wife and he saw one of these yes no machines in a diner, and then that's how it all started. But I think his message is that it is something that if you let yourself, you can be a slave to this stuff, but you actually have to exert that will, that mind over matter to say no, to pull yourself away from it. And I think there's something else going on here too. And this is one of those things that like I don't know whether this is kind of an unconscious thing, but I don't know if you noticed, but there's there's a whole lot of stuff there about money and specifically
Yes.
change, right? So
Yes.
it shows that they put the pennies in the fortune telling machine. They have to put uh, money in the jukebox. It's very clear that he's got to put specific kind of money in the payphone. It doesn't show it, but it implies that she's using money in the cigarette machine. The guy at the diner gives him he works out the tab in his mind and he gives them the total in pennies in down to the cents. And so there's this weird thing about money and capitalism there where it's like you've got to, in order to do your thing, you've got to put your change in, right? And there's all this
No, I
anxiety.
totally noticed it.
Yeah,
I totally noticed it. His first question was about money. And
right.
I was like, huh, that's very interesting. Like, so there's this sort of hierarchy in his brain that if he could find out about anything, the first thing he wants to find out about, does he get this promotion, which is more money and all of this?
Yeah, and I think that's something that goes across these three episodes is there's that societal anxiety at the time around young men working post war working in an office setting and trying to figure out who they are. Like
Yeah.
it is very much about the young, not so much young in the last episode, but like the young white man's identity in the working world, right? So there's that aspect to it, and there's also um, there's just that sense that everything that he's doing, and when we talk about things like psychic readings and those old Zoltan fortune telling machines, things like that, where it's like it is all about you put your coin in and you get the fortune back. So there's, and then even the word fortune, it's all about finance. So yeah, it's a
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
connection.
I think it's also too, in a little, like you were mentioning, the wife having the voice of reason. I think that it's very interesting the way we see, especially in these first two that we're talking about, the role of women in this because it's non-traditional, and I think of a time, again, of an era, that it was sort of empowering because she is the voice of reason. She is the one that says, okay, we can't chain ourselves to this. And I guess we'll talk about it more when we get to the second one. But there really are these female characters that seem slightly more empowered than your average housewife or your average secretary or something like that.
Yeah. So the second episode is Penny for Your Thoughts with Dick York, and in that it involves a coin where he throws a coin in to get a newspaper, and it just happens to land on its edge, and because of that, somehow he gets mind reading powers. And of course, I'm watching this. I'm immediately thinking, like, when they wrote Earshot on Buffy, they must have seen this episode, right? Because it's not so great to hear other people's thoughts, and and then there's there's the Mr. Smithers character, which I had to laugh because he's the old guy, but in this instance, he's not the rich guy from the Simpsons, but he wants to be. He fantasizes about it. And yeah, one of the lessons there is that, well, Dick York's character thinks that he's going to rob the bank, but it's really just a fantasy. And
Yes.
he's embarrassed by this, that when he finds out, like, oh, he wasn't actually ever going to do it. And it's played kind of as a comedy, but also definitely more comedic than the first one. But there's still
I think it's deeper.
edge to it. You what?
No, haha. Here's your joke. It has edge to it. But I think it's deeper. And actually the line is on edge for a brief time. So I feel like we were joking because we had connectivity problems and I said we were in the Twilight Zone. But it feels like they're in this liminal space, right? Like it's that universe where things are not going to land heads or tails. They're going to land on that edge. And we have I'm sure anybody who's watching this that does ATR practice like me knows that there are certain reading things where you throw cocos or you throw other things like that, and it can land up or it can land down. And when it lands on its side, all bets are off. It's pretty much this is time we need to stop or seriously reevaluate what it is we're doing and asking and the steps we're taking forward. So I thought that was interesting that he creates this otherworldly space and it gives him access to both the spoken, word that everybody's saying, but also their thoughts, which are off in all different directions.
Right. And of course, it's that old construct of mind reading on TV where people think in complete sentences and as if they're speaking when it's not really how we think usually. But
you don't? I don't know. I think I do. I don't know.
But it leads to, of course, it leads to shenanigans in that, because most of it takes place in that bank, right? And so yeah, and it devolves into. I mean, he's ultimately like winds up blackmailing his boss. And,
yes.
And it's like, oh, that's okay. He went in that direction, but then very clearly, when he comes out of that office and he's got the promotion now, he's got the girl. He's even like helped out the old guy by giving him a vacation, and he's walking out and he goes to the paper guy again, and he knocks over the coin, and so he loses the ability, but that's great. Like that sort of it comes full circle. So because it's you can imagine that if he kept that ability, he would probably get a lot further and further down the moral gray road. But it's almost like you're grateful that it's just he just had it for a brief day, and that was it. And now he can go on with his life with his promotion and his girlfriend. So he
seems grateful that it only happens for a brief time. It seems like a burden to him, which I think is the reality. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So again, it's that person who's he's trying to figure out who he is in the corporate world. He's trying to figure out how he fits in, and he knows that he's not being appreciated for his efforts, and he has to kind of go through these lengths to actually get the position that he deserves. Another statement on anxiety in the work world in post-war America.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like this episode because, I do a spirit lessons from sci-fi and you've taught it with me a bunch of times. And I always talk about these Twilight Zone moments in spirituality where we're in those liminal spaces and we're allowed to access things. And it's so important to be careful about, just as in the last episode we were discussing, what are we asking? What are we doing with the knowledge that we have? We see him doing good things with this knowledge, but he also could have, he could have robbed the bank. He could have shot the, security guard. Ocean's 11, right? Like.
So speaking of what you do with the power, that's really what the third episode is all about. Mind Over Matter, written by Rod Serling, and it's starring Shelley Berman, and this character Archibald, who's your basic misanthrope. He works in an incredibly crowded New York office. He takes the subway. He's just constantly surrounded by people. He's clearly he's clearly an introvert who wants to be left alone, doesn't want to deal with people at all. And this young I don't know page boy or whatever who like spills coffee on him,
Guy
they're kind of
Friday. Yeah.
Guy Friday, and it's funny because he gasps when he spills the coffee. It's like clearly not meant to be coded super masculine, but he gives him this book that because they're like friends, even though the guy can't stand him, and he gives him this book.
He can't stand anybody.
Can't stand anybody about mind over matter, and he very quickly devours this book at home, and then suddenly like his landlady's banging on the door for rent, and he makes her disappear. No explanation, of course, for how he does this. It's just he reads the book, he figures out how to concentrate, has these occult powers. There's even a point where he's when he's given the book, he's like, "Oh, this seems very occult to me." So he used the word occult.
Yes.
And yeah, so he decides he wants to do away with everybody in the world because everybody sucks. And very quickly he becomes bored. He like wants to start an earthquake just because why not? Like he doesn't have anything to do. But then he's like, okay, let's bring people back. All right, but let's make them all like me. and then he realizes what an asshole he is because everybody around him is like,
yeah. Wherever you go, you take yourself with you. That's Magic
right?
101 as well,
Yeah.
right? Like he's
and that's
what does he want? What is he asking, right? He's manifested this world where it's all him and he's so not happy. I did also want to say the book is founded on, he even mentions it, this concept that concentration is the most underrated power in the universe.
Right.
It reminds me of all those, and I apologize for any of our viewers who are proponents of The Secret, but that's what it reminds me of, right? Like I can just manifest it and will it into existence.
Yeah, I mean, there were 1950s versions of that. It was a very popular thing because it's like, and then they might even exoticize it. It's like we're going to use the secrets of the East to really just basic meditation, things like that. So yeah. I mean, and I was looking this up and I was seeing some conversations online about how this was this great occult lesson in occultism that where, as you said, wherever you go, there you are. And that you ultimately, in order to use this occult power, the first thing you got to do is face yourself, right?
Sure.
And then he ultimately decides, well, I'm just gonna put things back the way they were because it could be worse, and that's what in Serling's closing narration, he's like, well, maybe this is it might not be great, but maybe this is the best of all possible worlds after all. So again, it's sort of it's that lesson to sort of maybe be okay with things. Like he winds up being a little friendlier at the end, so I guess
sure, he certainly seems happier at the end, so that's there's that. I think it speaks to liminal space again, like I was talking about. For me, it's weird, except like this absence of women. The only time that I noticed anything, he's got the landlady who's the first person he makes disappear. Right. So back to the money again, right? Like the female's controlling the money, but we get rid of her. And then when he draws the sort of Salvador Dali mustache on the perfume ad of the woman in the subway, I'm just like, this is, I don't even know what Sterling is trying to say again. Like, I know, yes, we can do things when nobody's looking, but I think it's an interesting choice. It's an interesting choice of vandalism and the rest of it.
Well, there's even the moment where the actor Shelley Berman is in drag as a female version of himself because everybody looks like him, and they have like extras and masks and weird. I don't know, because they didn't have digital effects then, but it was So I mean, it really he's erasing women and putting himself even in that, and so
it's very weird.
What's funny too is, again, the third episode it's about that anxiety of the work world. What's funny is that he knows he's gotten rid of the people, but yet he still goes to work. Like
I thought that, I was like, it's 8:00 in the morning. Turn around and go back home. Like, what are you doing?
He just goes in the office and he knows he's got nothing to do, but he just kind of sits around like
making paper airplanes. I don't,
Yeah, I mean, like without that structure of work, they, the people of that time, if you're not an artist, if you're programmed to be in that world, you don't know what to do with yourself. if you don't have that structure, right?
No, it's true. I mean, and I feel like it was very insular, right? Like the fact that it's this huge. I mean, I grew up in New York. It's this huge city, 8 million people in the naked city, right? But pretty much we see this one room office with all these people packed in it. You know, getting to and from is this tiny space with everybody packed in it, and then his tiny apartment, which did have stained glass windows. But anyway, it's not that nice.
Yeah.
It's not that nice.
Yeah, you go
So
from
it's
one
just so
cubicle
grim.
to the next. You go from the tiny
Yeah.
apartment to the tiny subway
Mm-hmm.
to the tiny elevator to the tiny office. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I love the way he lies down too when he gets on the subway. Like this, I used to do that every time I saw an empty subway car. I would do something crazy, you know what I mean? Like start swinging from the whatever and interpretive dance and whatnot. But there's a way it allows you that freedom, right?
But yeah, Twilight Zone is, that's the foundation really of who we are as pop culturists, if that's a term. Um, and we owe a great homage to that. And Rod Serling was, he was a giant. And you know, I don't think we would have the stories that we have today if it wasn't for him. And even that the idea of like, when they talk about, like complaining about Jordan Peele doing Twilight Zone being woke, and thinking like, do you not know who Rod Serling was? Like, really?
Well, you know, people want to complain and everybody wants to have the semantic drift with what things mean. So
Yeah.
I'm just old and farty.
Thanks for joining us as we walk down memory lane. Before we were born, pretty much, but we watched these episodes when we were kids as well. And, we like doing some of the old things, some of the new things, and we'll have some great stuff coming up for you. Happy Thanksgiving, and we'll see you in December for some fun stuff. And don't forget to follow us at www.patreon.com/papacultureshow and on the Facebooks and the Instagrams.
Facebook, Instagram, follow our YouTube channel so you don't miss any new episodes. Everybody always tells me they're missing new episodes. And please like, comment, subscribe, all the things.